Hi, and welcome to Meeting Industry Compliance Auditing Requirements on AWS. My name is Andres Silva. Super excited to be here with you. I am a Principal Specialist Solutions Architect with the Cloud Management Services team here at AWS. I specialize in services like AWS Config, CloudTrail, and Systems Manager. And today we have a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about audits, how you can prepare for them, how you can collect the evidence for those important audits, and what services we provide that can help you in your journey, not only to compliance, but to be prepared for any audits or compliance frameworks requirements that you may have. Here's the agenda of the topics that we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk briefly about some of the challenges that many of our customers face as they start their journey into managing cloud infrastructure. Or maybe you already have cloud infrastructure running for quite some time, but you need to achieve compliance and you need to make sure you gather evidence for audits. We're going to talk about some of the common challenges we've seen with some of the customers we've talked to. Then we're going to go into a concept that's called the 3 lines of defense. And you will see how this concept helps to understand how our services come together to help you with compliance and auditing. Then we're going to do a deep dive into some of these services, show you how they work, show you how you can define the controls that are going to produce the evidence that you need, and how can you automate the process to collect all the evidence you need. And then at the end, we're going to talk about some key takeaways, things that we've learned, and what you can do to continue learning about this topic. So let's get started. Let's talk first about some of the challenges that our customers face. And on the screen here, I have some of them. We're not going to talk about all of them, but you may find yourself identified with some of these challenges. Just to call out a couple of them, one of them is the volume, variety, and velocity of cloud infrastructure resources. As you can imagine, when you are managing infrastructure in the cloud, the speed of changes and the scale of the resources that you have to manage presents a completely new challenge for customers that are trying to achieve compliance. Long gone are the days of trying to track these things manually. Think of an auto-scaling group, an ECS cluster or something like that is constantly spinning up and tearing down resources. You have to figure out a way of automating the process of inventorying those resources, validating their compliance, and making sure that they meet the requirements you need. Another challenge we hear often from customers is the different compliance and security needs every industry has. If you're in a healthcare organization, you may have very specific requirements around HIPAA, where if you are a financial institution, you may be more concerned with PCI DSS. Every industry and every organization has specific requirements and sometimes can be challenging to understand exactly what needs to be defined as a control and how to collect the evidence for that. So with those challenges in mind, we're going to try to help you understand these things better and what you can do later on in the presentation. But another challenge that we often hear is this one that you can see on the screen right now. Which one do I use for compliance? Which one do I use to collect my evidence for audits, to prepare for audits, so that I can ensure that my environment is not only secure, but is also meeting the compliance requirements? Do I start with guard duty? What is AWS config about? How do I use Systems Manager? Do I have to use Inspector? Some customers may be overwhelmed by just the wide range of capabilities that we have in AWS. And we understand that, right? And our goal is not to confuse you at all. We have all these services for a specific reason. In order to understand how all these services come together and where they fit, I want to introduce to you a very important concept. Is what we're calling the 3 lines of defense. The 3 lines of defense is a standard that has been established by the Institute of Internal Audits. And when you understand this concept and how it works, it makes it simpler to get a better sense of where each service fits. This model of the 3 lines of defense establishes that in order to manage infrastructure at scale and achieve compliance, you need to establish 3 lines of defense. The first line is where you manage risk. The second line is where you oversee risk. And the third line is where you provide assurance of risk management. What do these mean? Let's talk about them briefly. The first line of managed risk is where you define controls that specifically address risks in your environments. This is where services like AWS Config come in, CloudTrail, Systems Manager, even Control Tower and License Manager can fit in here. Why? Because they are controlling individual or defining individual controls for risks that could come up or arise in your infrastructure. For example, a very good example of that, S3 Bucket is one of our very popular services. You need to define a control that establishes that no S3 bucket should be made publicly available. You can do that with AWS Config, and I'll show you in a few minutes how that works. And you can automate the process of detecting that. That first line of defense is where you define those specific controls to detect and address risk. The second line of defense is where services like Security Hub and even in some cases CloudWatch come in, because they allow you to oversee risk across your entire infrastructure, no matter how many AWS accounts you have, no matter how many regions you're operating on. Services like Security Hub can give you a very quick single place where you can get a complete picture of your security posture across all these resources. So that is the second line of defense, and that's where those services fit in. And then the third line of defense is, as you know, inevitably what's going to happen after you have defined your controls and you have good oversight of them, is that at some point an auditor is going to come in and say, hey, prove to me that you're indeed establishing and meeting these controls that you have defined for this specific compliance framework. Well, that's where a service was released at reInvent 2020 comes in. Audit Manager. AWS Audit Manager helps you automate the process of collecting all the evidence that you need to prepare for audits. So it puts you in a position where you don't have to now put an all hands on deck effort so that everybody can collect the evidence and all the reports needed, because it does it continuously. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later. So now when you use this framework to put our services in it, it all makes more sense, right? You're going to always need some services to manage risk. You're always going to need some services to oversee risk, and you're going to need services to provide that assurance of risk management that you indeed are ready for an audit. So the three lines of defense model helps a lot in understanding that. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about some of these services more in depth. Let's talk first about AWS Config and how it can help you with compliance and with your audits also. The first line of defense, as you remember, is manage risk. And this is where a service like AWS Config comes in. Now, it is very important in order to meet your compliance requirements and to handle the requirements of your audits that you define and automate the controls that you need to meet for each one of these compliance frameworks. And this is just a quick sample of them. Of course, as you know, there's many more. And one size doesn't fit all, right? In the sense that even if you are, for example, trying to achieve HIPAA, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same for every organization. You need to do some sort of customization and tailor it to specific needs. But the key here, and what we want to emphasize, is that as you do that, you want to use services like AWS Config to define those controls in the cloud so that you can detect any non-compliance resources based on the specific controls that are required by your compliance framework. How does the AWS Config help you do that? How does it help you achieve that? Well, AWS Config has a number of features that make it simpler. The first one is how, when you turn it on, it starts tracking all the resources that are created or modified in your infrastructure. Then on top of that, you can use a feature called config rules. And those config rules are the equivalent of your controls. Remember the example I gave you a couple minutes ago about having or ensuring that an S3 bucket is not public? Well, in an AWS config rule, you can define that as a control that validates that all those resources across all your accounts, across all the regions, are indeed meeting those compliance requirements. Once it's detected, the resource will be flagged as non-compliant, and you have a number of options on how to address that. You can fix it with a feature that we call remediation actions, or you can open a ticket and have somebody track it for further resolution later on. Let's dive deeper into some of those features to understand how they can help you define those controls. We already talked a little bit about those rules. Those config rules is where you're going to define those controls. EBS volumes need to be encrypted. CloudTrail needs to be enabled. S3 buckets should not be public. Those rules define the expected behavior or the expected configuration of a resource. That's the desired configuration, and every time a resource is changed, it is evaluated, and then you can take action on it. And the way you can take action, as you can see in the slide in the middle icon there, is with remediation actions. Now, remediation actions is a feature that allows you to define automation that has the goal of addressing the non-compliant resource. That automation is executed in AWS Systems Manager Automation platform, and it allows you to define, okay, if I detect an S3 bucket that is public, how do I fix it? How do I address it? And you can define there the steps to make the necessary API calls to our platform to fix that resource. Now, the third feature that you see here that is very important to understand when you're talking about defining those controls is conformance packs. And what conformance packs allows you to do is that it allows you to take a group of these rules and these remediation actions and put them into a single entity. That single entity is going to be deployed across all your accounts, across all the regions. And once you deploy those rules that are now part of the single entity, the individual rules are immutable. They cannot be changed. So that ensures the integrity of the compliance data and the evidence that you're collecting for audit purposes from all those resources. Here's a quick snapshot talking about rules, controls, and how you can define them. This is a picture I took from our documentation for one of our conformance packs. I explained briefly what those conformance packs are a minute ago. But as you can see here, these are mappings for a specific compliance framework and how they map a specific AWS config rules in that framework. So as you can see in 164.308a, implement security measures to sufficient to reduce risk and vulnerabilities to a reasonable and appropriate level to comply. And you can read the rest of it, right? But that maps to that specific EBS encryption by default as it relates to volumes that you use on EC2 instances in AWS. So this is how you define those controls. And the reason I have that list, I want to talk to you a little bit more about conformance packs in a minute, is because the goal is for you to define those controls in AWS config as rules and deploy them as conformance packs to simplify the deployment mechanism. What I want to do now is show you a demo of how these combination of rules and remediation actions work. And the key, what I want you to see in this example, is how you can simplify the process of addressing non-compliant resources at scale. Let's take a look at the demo now. In this demo, I'm going to show you how you can use AWS config rules and remediation actions to address non-compliant resources at scale. One of the key things when you are managing infrastructure at scale in the cloud in AWS is to make sure that you automate as much as possible when it comes to compliance. That means to quickly detect non-compliant resources and, if needed, fix them so that they come back to a compliant state. The example I'm going to show you will use a config rule that tracks security groups, EC2 security groups, to detect if any ports that are not approved have been configured in those security groups. As soon as a security group is created or modified with unapproved ports, immediately AWS config will detect them, flag them as non-compliant, and potentially, as we're going to see in this example, remediate them by removing the non-approved ports. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the AWS config console, and then I'm going to go into rules here. And in the rules, I have a rule that I have already deployed here called restricted common ports, as you can see. Let's go ahead and take a look at this rule more in detail so that we can understand better what it's doing. This rule that I'm showing you is a manage config rule that you can deploy in your account. And what it does, as you can see here in the description, is it checks whether a security group that is in use is allowing unrestricted ports or ports that are not supposed to be configured. I have specified in the rule the ports that I'm interested in tracking, and I've also configured a remediation action to fix that non-compliant ports. In this case, what this remediation action does is that it executes an AWS Systems Manager Automation document that will take as an input the security group and remove any of those non-approved ports. So as soon as I've done this and I have deployed my rule, when I go into the rule here at the bottom, I can see there has been one resource that has been detected and is non-compliant. Let's take a closer look here in config at this resource. I'm going to go here and move to that details of that resource. So I can see here that the security group name is called SSH only, and I can see that it's now non-compliant. Let's go ahead and click in resource timeline to see what happened here with this resource and why and when it became non-compliant. If I click on timeline, I can see that something happened right around this time. This resource became non-compliant at this time. And then in here, I have access also to the CloudTrail event that was logged that caused that resource to become non-compliant. This is important. It's important to call out the tight integration we have between AWS Config and CloudTrail. If I wanted to get more details on the event, I can click on this link, and I will be taken straight into CloudTrail to see more information directly from CloudTrail and what happened here. Here I have the configuration change that actually happened. I can see that there were two rules that were added for port 3389 and port 22. Interesting. And that, of course, resulted in the resource becoming non-compliant, as you can see here. So a lot of good information I'm getting from looking at the timeline of the event. If I go back to the security group and I wanted to validate, see what's going on, I can click on Manage Resource here. And Manage Resource is going to take me straight to that security group in the EC2 console, as you can see here. And now looking at the inbound rules, I can see that indeed that security group has non-approved ports configured, port 22 and port 3389. So let's go ahead and fix that, right? As I said before, this remediation action is configured for manual remediation, which means once the resource is detected as non-compliant, the system will flag it as non-compliant here, and then an operator can come here, click on the resource, and then select from here the remediate button. Let's go ahead and do that and see what happens. I'm going to click remediate. We'll wait a few seconds. As you can see, it says that the action execution has been queued. What that means is that AWS Config has called out to Systems Manager Automation to execute that remediation action. I'm going to go ahead and refresh here, see what happened. And it says that the action has executed successfully. So let's go ahead real quick and go back to the EC2 security group console. This is where the security group definition is. And let's refresh and see what the current state of the security group is. As you can see, the non-approved ports have been automatically removed. So this, as you can see, simplifies greatly the process of addressing compliant at scale. After the remediation action runs, in a couple of minutes, the resource will be reevaluated and now it will become compliant again. As you can see, AWS config rules and remediation actions make it very easy for you to automate the process of bringing back into compliance non-compliant resources at scale. Thank you. Well, as you can see on that demo, it is very simple to automate the process of fixing your non-compliant resources. Now, once you have defined what are the rules or controls that you need for your specific environment, you can take those rules and remediation actions and put them inside a conformance pack template. That conformance pack template will be deployed across all your accounts in your organization. Now, the other interesting thing that we're doing with conformance packs is because we know one of the core goals of our customers is to meet certain regulatory compliance requirements. We have prepared a number of sample templates. We have over 50 of them. And these sample templates, the idea behind them is to get you started on your journey in addressing compliance. We have for some of the most common compliance frameworks, and you can download them and modify them to fit your specific needs, change some of the settings to ensure they're meeting the requirements that you have for your organization. Let me show you a quick demo of how you can take one of these sample templates and customize it to fit your needs. Let's go and watch the demo. Hi, in this demo, I'm going to show you how you can customize one of our Conformance Pack sample templates to meet the specific needs of your organization. As you know, Conformance Packs is a very easy way of grouping AWS config rules and remediation actions and deploy them as a single entity across your entire organization. We provide a number of sample Conformance Packs to get you started in your journey with compliance. We recommend that customers take the sample Conformance Packs and customize it to their specific needs. That may require them to remove some of the rules included there, or perhaps change some of the settings on it, or add remediation actions. The example I'm going to show you, we will use the operational best practices for CIS Conformance Pack. As you can see on the screen, I'm at our documentation page where we have the list of all the controls that the sample template provides. What we're going to do is we're going to take the sample Conformance Pack and we are going to add a remediation action to it. What we want to do is locate here a specific control that matches to a rule that tracks if a bucket has public access enabled. And let's scroll down here and find that Conformance Pack. Public read, S3 public read prohibited, as you can see right there. So that sample Conformance Pack is there. That rule is in that sample Conformance Pack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and download the sample template and then customize it with the remediation action. To download the sample template, I can simply scroll down here and click on the GitHub link. So this is going to take me to the GitHub page where I can see the sample template for CIS. And as you can see, this template is in CloudFormation format. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it so I can modify it. And to copy it, what I can do is in GitHub, I can just click on the raw button here. It'll show me just the raw text of the file. I'm going to right click here, select all. I'm going to right click here again, select copy. Then I'm going to go to my text editor back here, and I'm just going to paste the content of it. As you can see, now I have the Conformance Pack sample template in my text editor. Now this would be a great time for me to modify also some of the default values for the parameters that are included in this Conformance Pack. For example, if I wanted to change the access key rotated parameter from 90 days to a shorter date, like 60 days, I could do it right here. Same thing for any of the other parameters, as you can see down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find the rule that checks if an S3 bucket has public access enabled. I'm going to go through all the rules here and find public access prohibited, as you can see there. So we're going to insert, just for consistency's sake, the remediation action right after that rule. It is not required, but it's definitely going to make the file itself easier to read and understand. So let's go ahead and go back here to another Conformance Pack sample template. This is the one for S3 best practices with remediation. And in here, I already have the definition of a remediation action to turn off public access on an S3 bucket. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. And select copy from here. And I'm going to go back to my text editor and I'm going to insert that remediation action right there. So let's go over some of the settings this remediation action provides. As you can see, one of the things that we're doing here is setting up a dependency of this remediation action to the rule. That will ensure that this rule is created first, because it is required that the rule is created first and then the remediation action resource is attached to it. We specify the type, and then we reference the config rule that this remediation action is related to. As you can see, is the one that has been already created here. The resource type refers to the type of resources that this remediation action applies to. And then we have here the target ID. The target ID is the AWS Systems Manager Automation document that will be used to remediate that resource. And the target type is SSM document, and then the target version. Then we pass some parameters that are required by the automation document.
This automation document requires two parameters. One of them is an execution rule so that it can perform the action of fixing the S3 bucket. This role must have the right permissions to change the setting. And down here, the other parameter that is required is the resource ID for the S3 bucket that will be remediated. So those are the definitions of the key definitions of the parameters. And then over here we have some settings related to concurrent execution rate. And one important setting here is if the remediation is going to be automatic. If I wanted to change the remediation to be manual, I would change this setting instead of true to false. And that will make the remediation manual, in which case an operator has to go into the console and start the remediation in order for it to happen. The number of attempts, the retry, we can just leave it as default. So now that I have my remediation, I can go ahead and save this file and upload it to the platform with my customization. If at any point I needed to make any modification to my conformance pack, I can come here back to the original template, make the modification, and do an update of the conformance pack for any settings that I need to change. That's it. This has been a quick demo of how you can customize a conformance pack sample template to fit your specific needs. Thank you.
So as you can see on that demo, you can customize these controls to your specific needs in your organization. Now, when we talk about compliance, when we talk about meeting audit requirements, we have to talk about CloudTrail. CloudTrail is a very powerful service that we have, and that is part of that first line of defense of managing risk. CloudTrail, as you probably know, is our audit trail platform that records all the activity that happens on your account. If a user logs into the console, if an API call is made, as you can imagine, this is very, very important for making sure that you're auditing everything that happens in your account. Not only for security purposes, but also because a lot of the compliance audits require you to have a strategy for that. Now, one important feature of CloudTrail is a feature we call data events. Now, what is data events about? Data events allows you to track granular resource actions on specific services, like S3. What do I mean by that? Well, the default CloudTrail configuration of management events will track resource control actions like creating a bucket, deleting a bucket, modifying a bucket property, but it will not track individual file access operations like somebody read a file, somebody deleted a file. But you could do that with CloudTrail data events. And CloudTrail data events is a super important service if you're trying to meet some of these compliance frameworks requirements. In fact, of the 50-something conformance packs that we have there for some of the most common compliance frameworks, more than 30 require you to have data events enabled because you need that powerful auditing tracking capabilities. So what happens is once you enable data events, now you have access to data about who accessed a file, who deleted a file, who modified a file. And as you can imagine with this feature, this is super important to quickly detect any potential risks related to data exfiltration, but also to prove that you have in place measures to audit data access in your applications. Let me show you a demo of how it works because that's the best way of appreciating how powerful this feature is. Let's take a look at this demo of how CloudTrail data events works.
In this demo, we'll show you some of the features of CloudTrail and CloudWatch that you can use to manage risk at scale. Now, many of the most used compliance frameworks include controls to manage the risk associated with data exfiltration. For example, PCI DSS, NIST, and FedRAMP all require you to monitor and control access to files stored on S3 to detect any anomalous activity. You can accomplish this by using CloudTrail data events. Let's demonstrate how you can set up a data events trail to track all access to an S3 bucket. Later, we'll show you how you can use CloudWatch logs to search and filter all the activity produced by CloudTrail data events. To create a CloudTrail data events trail, we can go to the CloudTrail console and click Create a Trail. We need to enter a name. Let's call this trail CCA Demo Events. We're going to go ahead and select Create a new S3 bucket. The console will auto-populate a name for me. Let's make sure that KMS encryption is enabled, and we'll give the KMS alias a name. Let's call it CCA Demo. We make sure log file validation is enabled, and we're going to go ahead and enable CloudWatch logs. What this is going to do is send the data produced by CloudTrail Data events to a CloudWatch logs group. This will help with searching the logs and getting insights from it, as we'll demonstrate later in this demo. Let's make sure we have a new log group, and let's give it a name. Let's give a name to the IAM role that will be used, CCA Demo. We're going to click Next. We're going to uncheck management events, and we're going to check data events because that's what we're interested in tracking on this trail. We make sure S3 is selected. We want to uncheck all S3 buckets because we're interested in tracking a specific bucket for this demo. Is this CCA Demo CloudTrail bucket. But of course, you can always enable it for all buckets that are currently on the account and all future buckets also. Let's click Next and review all the information and click Create. My trail has been created, CCA Demo Events, and it's logging. Now, after I have created my CloudTrail Data events to track everything that happens on that S3 bucket, let's say that I need to investigate a file that was deleted on that bucket. I need to find out what happened. It's a sensitive file. Let's go find out using CloudWatch logs. To do that, let's go to the CloudWatch console. Let's click on Log Groups and locate the the log group that was created for this specific data events trail. This is it. So let's click on this log stream right here. And here I have all the data that is being sent from CloudTrail Data events. Let's look for a delete object event in that log group. And immediately I get some information here about the API calls to delete object that was done on that S3 bucket. I can see here that at this specific time here, there was a file that was deleted. The name of the file was readme.md. And who did it? I have the information of the person that actually did it. So this is in it, as you can see, very powerful to track any sensitive operations that were done on your file. A couple of other things that I wanted to call out that you can do with CloudWatch logs in relation to CloudTrail is that you can take advantage of log insights. So with log insights, what you can do is you can run very specific queries that track specific operations, specific actions that were created by CloudTrail Data events. We provide some sample queries that you can use to learn how the system works. But let's go ahead and run a query that tracks all the delete object events and gives me back, as you can see, the bucket name, the file name, and who did it, right? So let's go ahead and run that query. And as you can see here in the results, we quickly find that there has been a number of events with the delete object, and I get the information that I ask, the bucket name, the name of the file that was deleted, and who did it. Right? So this is very powerful information for my investigation of what happened to that file. With the results of this query, you can add them to a dashboard so you can constantly track what's happening in that specific bucket. You can create an alarm that can page somebody if a file is modified or deleted. So as you can see, these are very powerful tools to allow you to handle any risk associated with data exfiltration. This is a key component of compliance at scale, and by combining the power of CloudTrail Data events with CloudWatch Logs Group, this greatly simplifies the process of you having all the information you need to track any anomalous activity.
All right, so that's CloudTrail, and you see how powerful it can be and how much it can help you with your compliance requirements. But now let's talk about another very important service, Systems Manager. The Systems Manager is our operations hub in AWS, and it has a lot of features. But high level, It aims at allowing you to group resources so that you can visualize key data for operations and then take action on it. Now, why is Systems Manager so important when we talk about compliance and auditing? Well, it's for a number of reasons, but I want to highlight three very quickly. One of them is the fact that with Run Command and State Manager, you can extend the power of compliance validation all the way down to the EC2 instance level. If you needed to validate that specific applications were installed in an EC2 instance, if you needed to validate that specific files were in place or that a configuration setting on the network is enabled inside the instance, Systems Manager with Run Command and State Manager can collect that data for you, and then it's sent back to AWS Config for compliance and control definition purposes. So you can see how these two services work hand in hand to simplify the process of compliance and auditing. The other important feature that we need to talk about when we discuss AWS Systems Manager is automation. Why? Well, automation allows you to design repetitive IT workflows that you can execute against AWS infrastructure. This is the platform that you can use to design your remediation actions that will fix non-compliant resources as soon as they are detected. So that's another important reason why automation is a big part of the conversation when we talk about compliance and auditing. Because one of the important elements of compliance and auditing is that you simplify as much as possible, that you detect immediately and that you take action as soon as possible. And Systems Manager Automation allows you to do that. Now, there are many other services that come like Systems Manager in that first line of defense. I'm going to touch briefly on a couple more that are important. AWS Backup. AWS Backup is so important because data protection is key for compliance, for audits. You need to make sure you have a data protection strategy in place, and AWS Backup simplifies that. It allows you to create a backup plan that simplifies the process of making sure that all these services that you see on the screen are automatically backed up. And you set it and forget it, essentially. And once it starts, it continuously takes care of backing up all those resources for you. Now, the interesting thing is that once you have those backup plans in place, you can use AWS Config to define controls that validate that you have those in place. And if anybody would make a change to those backup plans, or they will, for whatever reason, go off, AWS Config will immediately detect that with a config rule, and you can take action on it. The resource will be flagged as non-compliant, and then you have a number of options how you can handle it. But the key thing is here that this service also allows you to define the controls for data protection with a more simple approach, because the information about do you have a backup plan in place that is executing and is working as expected will be automatically collected by AWS Config, and as you will see in a couple of minutes, can be eventually sent to Audit Manager so that you're prepared for your audits. Something very similar happens with another one of our very important services for for data protection, which is CloudEndure. CloudEndure simplifies the process of disaster recovery strategies. And the same thing, once you're using CloudEndure and you're replicating your resources, perhaps to another region, or you're replicating resources that are on-premise to the cloud, you can actually deploy rules that validate if indeed those resources are operating as expected. So as you can see, all these services work together, and when you establish your data protection strategies, you can validate that they're working properly by using services like AWS Config, and you can collect the evidence automatically with Audit Manager. Okay, let's do a demo of how this example that I just showed you of CloudEndure works. Now in this demo, I'm going to show you how the CloudEndure custom rule can work to help you detect resources that maybe are not behaving the way expected and replicating its data using CloudEndure. This is a very powerful feature that can help you detect non-compliance resources for disaster recovery purposes. So what I have in this account here, as you can see, I'm in the AWS Config console, and I have a rule that I've deployed. This is a custom rule that we have made available in our GitHub repository, and I'll share the link for that at the end of this presentation. And this rule what it does is that it communicates with the CloudEndure API and checks information about resources to ensure that they're properly replicating. So what I have here, and I'm going to show you, is I have in this CloudEndure account, I have one resource that I've added to CloudEndure and is in continuous data protection. But as you can see, it says ready for testing, which means it's replicating, but we haven't tested it. So what that means for my compliance requirement is, okay, you are backing up the data, but have you validated that it indeed can put you in a position to recover from a disaster? That's the part that's missing. So I've deployed this rule here, CloudEndure check replication, as you can see, and it has detected, as you can see in the bottom here, that this instance is currently non-compliant, and it gives you the reason for it. Now, very easily, now I can see in one place what my status is regarding data protection as it relates to CloudEndure. I could deploy this rule as part of a conformance pack to ensure it's deployed across all the accounts and regions where I need to ensure data replication is happening for disaster recovery purposes, and then aggregate all that data into a central location. This kind of information can also be continuously collected by Audit Manager, as I'm going to show you in a few slides. So as you can see, it's a very simple way of putting everything together and including your data protection requirements for compliance and audit also. So as you can see in that demo, it's very simple to define the controls that are going to give you information about data protection, about any other risk that may be present in your infrastructure. But once we have established all those managed risk first line of defense controls, we need an efficient way of overseeing that risk. And this is where a service, Security Hub, comes in at the second line of defense. And what Security Hub does is it collects information from multiple sources, including AWS Config, including CloudTrail, and as you can see on the screen, GuardDuty, Macie, Inspector, Firewall Manager, and many more. And it aggregates it in a central place. The way it collects that information is based on some compliance standards that we provide. And then what you can do is you can have a single place where you can see your security posture across multiple accounts and across multiple regions. This is why in that second line of defense, a service like Security Hub is so important. And then on the third line of defense, we have a service that we briefly touched on at the beginning of our presentation, which is Audit Manager. And this is super important for the topic that we're discussing today, because you want to understand how you can simplify audits. Now, the way Audit Manager works is that we have what we call frameworks, and I'll show you how that works in a demo briefly, but those frameworks define the specific controls that are required for some of the most common compliance frameworks, PCI, HIPAA. What you do is you take those frameworks and you deploy them in your account. You can create your own frameworks, also custom frameworks, and you can take one of our frameworks and modify them and add on top of it additional controls. Then you take that framework and you define what's called the scope of the assessment. It may be accounts, resources, services that you want to be in scope for this assessment. And once you have defined that, you activate the assessment in Audit Manager. And what's going to start happening immediately is that Audit Manager is going to start collecting all the information from all the sources that it has, and it's going to start putting them into a single place. Then, once that information is collected, you can do control reviews, or you can delegate the control reviews to other users so they can validate it. Once the control review has been completed, all that information is collected into Audit Manager, and at the single click of a button, you can generate your audit reports. Let me show you real quick a demo of how that works right on the Audit Manager console. Let's take a look at it. So let me show you a little bit about Audit Manager. I think you're going to be very excited about this service and how it can help simplify the process of collecting evidence. When you first log into the console, you will see this welcome screen. You can just click on Launch AWS Audit Manager. And as you can see here I have deployed a couple of assessments already, but I want to walk you through the process of how these are deployed. The first thing that we have is a control library. If I go to the left here, I can go there. And the control library is essentially the definition of those controls that map to a requirement from a compliance frameworks. Some of those controls are, as you can see, are manual because we cannot validate them with code or with AWS. And some of them, so that for those controls, you would have to have somebody actually assess the control, and then they can go into Audit Manager and document it properly to validate that they have been already checked. But other controls are automatic. As you can see, the second one here, it uses in the data source API calls on AWS Config. And if we click on it, we can see the details of this specific control. And this control has documentation and all the config rules that it uses and all the different data sources, right? So as you can see, some of the data sources are API calls. Some of the data sources are rules from AWS Config. That's why AWS Config is such an important service to collect evidence for audit purposes. So you take then, after you define, and there's a number of controls that we provide for you in the service, but you can create your own custom controls. If I wanted to do that, I could just click on this button and define my own control. That could be manual, that could be automated also based on what I require. Now, those controls, either the standard ones we provide or the ones that you built yourself as a customer, go into a framework library. We already provide you a number of frameworks for the most common compliance frameworks, as you can see, CIS, GDPR, HIPAA, and many more. You can create your own custom framework, or you can take one of these frameworks and you can create your own one based on it. So it creates a copy of it, and then you can build on top of it. Once you have your framework that you're going to use, then you can do and deploy an assessment. And this is where I was when I first logged into the console. In my example here, I have a couple of assessments. I have one that I've created out of conformance packs that have been deployed. That's a big advantage you can do. You can create an assessment that is based strictly on the conformance packs and maybe one of the sample conformance packs that you have customized so that you can collect all the evidence. Or in this case, I use my a SOC 2 assessment that comes out of the box from Audit Manager. And now I have it deployed, and it starts collecting the evidence, and some of it has been reviewed. Some of it still has to be reviewed, but now it's ready to start reviewing. And once I've completed it, I can just very easily generate my reports for my assessments, and they will be delivered to an S3 bucket so that I can take them and provide them to my auditor. So that's just a quick overview of how Audit Manager looks and how it can simplify the process of collecting evidence for your audits. So as you saw in that demo, it's very simple to deploy your assessments and collect all the evidence you need for compliance purposes. So that's an overview of some of the services that make those three lines of defense, how you can use them together to simplify compliance and auditing. What are some key takeaways, things that we want you to walk away with from this presentation? Well, the first thing is we want, hopefully, you to understand the three lines of defense approach and how these helps us understand better where each one of our services fit and how they work together. The second thing is that it is so important that you can automate and simplify controls that you deploy to validate compliance. Take advantage of tools like AWS Config, like CloudTrail, CloudTrail Data Events, Systems Manager for remediation. The idea is that you automate as much as possible so you can simplify the process. And then build on top of that. Leverage Security Hub for oversight of your compliance, and do leverage, of course, Audit Manager to collect all the evidence you need. Hopefully, we've showed you the art of the possible in this presentation, how you can combine these services and use them to simplify your journey to compliance and meet the requirements for your audits. What are some next steps you can take? Well, dive deep into these technologies. Learn more about them. Hopefully, the overview we gave you sparks your interest into learning more about each one of these services. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of blogs that walk you through how you can do different things, how you can tackle large-scale deployments, how you can do best practices. We have a lot of blogs that can help you with that. And then talk to your account team. Please reach out to your account team here at AWS. We'll be more than happy to help you with any questions you may have, additional presentations, so that you can feel comfortable leveraging these services. And with that, I want to thank you all for being with me here in this presentation. And we hope the information we shared today can help you simplify compliance requirements and auditing. Thank you.